It was a cold November morning in 1981 when 12-year-old Jamie Collins left his house for school, just like he did every weekday. He was wearing his favorite denim jacket, the one with the patched sleeve his mom had sewn on for him after a bike fall. Jamie waved goodbye to his little sister, tossed his backpack over his shoulder, and stepped out into the crisp autumn air of the small town of Pine Hill, Pennsylvania. That was the last time anyone ever saw him. No one could have imagined how a normal school day would end in a decades-long mystery, one that would haunt the town for generations. For over 2 decades, his family searched, waited, and hoped, clinging to memories and rumors. Then, 22 years later, something strange happened. During a renovation at his old middle school, a sealed locker was forced open, and inside, they found his jacket. At first glance, it was just a worn-out jacket, dusty, faded, and smelling of old metal and time. But when the janitor saw the name Jamie C. written in fading marker on the inside tag, his hands trembled. Within hours, the school was surrounded by police, news vans, and curious townsfolk who hadn't spoken Jamie's name out loud in years. Questions came pouring back. Where had he gone? How did his jacket end up in a sealed locker, untouched for over 2 decades? And why had no one found it until now? Back in 1981, Jamie was just another 6th grader trying to survive middle school. He wasn't the most popular, but he had a small group of close friends. He was known for being curious, a little too adventurous, always asking questions about things other kids didn't even notice. His teachers described him as sharp, even gifted, though sometimes a bit distracted. His parents, Margaret and Frank Collins, were regular folks. Frank worked at the nearby paper mill and Margaret was a part-time librarian. They raised Jamie and his younger sister Emily in a modest 2-story house near the woods, where kids played freely and families left their doors unlocked. The morning Jamie vanished, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. He walked to school with his friend Tyler, who remembered Jamie stopping near the old maintenance shed at the edge of school property. He said he thought he saw something weird. Tyler recalled years later in a local newspaper interview. Like someone was watching us. But I didn't see anything, and we just kept walking. That was the last time Tyler saw Jamie. When he didn't come home that afternoon, Margaret called the school, then the police. What followed was a frantic search that pulled together neighbors, search dogs, volunteers, and helicopters. They combed the woods, dragged the lake behind the school, and even questioned the teachers and staff. But there were no clues. Not a backpack, not a footprint, not a trace. Rumors spread fast in Pine Hill. Some thought Jamie had run away. Others whispered about something darker. Maybe someone had taken him. The janitor at the time, a quiet older man named Mr. Wilkins, was questioned repeatedly. Some kids found him creepy, mostly because he kept to himself and had an old-school attitude that didn't mix well with children. But police never found any evidence linking him or anyone else to Jamie's disappearance. Over time, people stopped talking about it. The town moved on. Jamie became one of those unsolved stories that older kids told in hushed tones during sleepovers and Halloween. The Collins family eventually moved away, unable to bear the pain of waiting every day for a boy who never came home. Fast forward to 2003. Pine Hill Middle School was undergoing major renovations. New wings were being added, lockers replaced, old rooms gutted and repurposed. It was during this process that a group of workers was tasked with removing an old row of unused lockers in a long-forgotten hallway that had been sealed off for years due to asbestos concerns. One of the lockers, number 237, was rusted shut and had to be pried open. The door creaked off its hinges, and inside was something that immediately stopped the workers in their tracks, a child's denim jacket, folded carefully on the top shelf. When police arrived, they treated the locker as a potential crime scene. Forensics teams moved in, though the jacket itself yielded few immediate answers. No blood, no fingerprints, no signs of struggle. Just that name, scrawled on the inside, Jamie C., and a few school papers stuffed into one of the pockets. The papers had water damage and mold, but one was clearly a spelling test dated November 10th, 1981. Jamie's name was at the top, and he had scored 100%. The news spread fast. For a town that had nearly forgotten the boy, his name was suddenly everywhere again. People who had gone to school with Jamie started digging through their own memories. Some said they remembered strange things, noises in the hallway, odd behavior from staff, or that feeling that something wasn't quite right back then. Tyler, now in his 30s and living in a neighboring town, came forward again to talk to authorities. So did Emily, Jamie's younger sister, now a grown woman with a family of her own. Seeing her brother's jacket again broke her. "I never believed he ran away," she said in an interview. "He wouldn't have left me. He promised he wouldn't." But how did the jacket end up in a locker no one had touched in 22 years? Lockers are cleared out at the end of every school year. Students come and go. Maintenance crews clean, repaint, and reorganize. And yet, this one had been sealed, overlooked, forgotten. Or was it hidden? The deeper police looked into the school's old records, the stranger things got. Locker 237 wasn't assigned to anyone in 1981. In fact, it was listed as broken and out of use, which meant someone would have had to deliberately put Jamie's jacket inside and seal it up. Who had access to the lockers back then? Who would have a reason to hide something so important? And why leave it in the school at all? That's when investigators turned their attention to staff members who had worked at the school in 1981. Many were long retired or had moved away. But one name came up again and again. Someone who knew the building better than anyone. Someone who had keys to every door, every locker. Someone who always seemed to be around, even when no one was looking. What happened to Jamie Collins on that cold November morning in 1981? Was it a tragic accident, a sinister act, or something even stranger that no one could have predicted? And what secrets still lie behind the old brick walls of Pine Hill Middle School? Because finding the jacket was just the beginning. And what came next, no one was ready for. When the jacket was found in that locker, it felt like the town had been yanked backward in time. People who hadn't spoken about Jamie Collins in decades found themselves suddenly remembering little things, his laugh in the school hallways, the way he would always ask questions during science class, or how he used to doodle on the back of his homework. It was like a part of him had been frozen in time, locked away in a metal box, waiting for someone to come looking. But instead of giving closure, the discovery only brought more confusion and pain. Detectives reopened the case almost immediately, calling it an active missing person case with new physical evidence. Forensic teams took the jacket and the contents of the locker to a lab, hoping some forgotten fiber or trace might offer a breakthrough. But nothing stood out. The jacket was authentic, aged exactly as expected, and the papers were verified to be originals from the early 80s. There were no fingerprints that could be matched to anyone in the system, and the locker itself had no signs of tampering. No forced entry. No scratch locks. It was as if someone had opened it normally, placed the jacket inside, and then simply walked away, like they knew no one would look there for decades. Police interviews focused on the old school staff, many of whom were retired or deceased. One name, though, kept coming up: Charles Wilkins, the janitor back in 1981. At the time, he had been in his early 60s, quiet, private, and always working alone. Some former students remembered him as odd but harmless. Others told a different story about how he would sometimes show up in unexpected places, like the girls' locker room, or how he was seen more than once coming out of the boiler room after hours. But again, nothing concrete. He had never been arrested, never disciplined, and he had worked at Pine Hill Middle School for nearly 20 years before retiring in 1985. Detectives tracked down his last known address, a small home on the outskirts of town, but it had been sold years ago. Wilkins, they learned, had passed away in 1996. No children, no surviving relatives. Just a dusty obituary in the back of the local paper that read, Charles Wilkins, 74, former school custodian, passed away quietly in his home. He was a lifelong resident of Pine Hill. But there were no details, no memorial. No one seemed to remember attending his funeral. Still, people started to wonder. If he had keys to every room and locker in the school, and he was working there when Jamie disappeared, could he have been hiding something all along? And if he was, what had he been trying to keep hidden? Emily Collins, now 33, returned to Pine Hill for the first time in nearly a decade. She hadn't stepped foot in her hometown since her parents moved away in the late 90s. Standing in front of the school where her brother vanished, she felt a strange mix of sadness and anger. She remembered being only 8 when Jamie disappeared. She remembered his voice, his promises, The way he always looked out for her, even when the bigger kids picked on her at the bus stop. And she remembered the chaos that followed, the search parties, the crying, the way her mom stopped cooking dinner or going outside. The house went quiet after Jamie was gone, as if the whole world had shut down. Emily agreed to help the investigation. She sat with detectives, looked at the jacket, flipped through the old papers that had been found in the pocket. She cried when she saw his handwriting. One paper had a crude sketch of a spaceship, something Jamie had been obsessed with. He wanted to be an astronaut, she whispered. He used to say the stars were calling him. But her face changed when she saw a second sketch, one that looked like a map. Not a detailed one, more like a child's drawing, showing a hallway, a door, and what looked like stairs leading downward. No one knew what to make of it at first, until Emily said something that made everyone pause. "That looks like the old wing of the school," she said. "The one they closed down before Jamie went missing." Back in 1981, the west wing of Pine Hill Middle School had been declared unsafe due to a minor fire that damaged part of the structure. The school board had closed it off temporarily, intending to demolish and rebuild it, but budget cuts had delayed the project. Over time, it became forgotten. By 2003, it was a sealed section, used only for storage, with paint-chipped walls and rusted door frames. Most students didn't even know it existed. The map Jamie had drawn led to a door near the end of a hallway, down a short flight of stairs to what had once been the basement art room. When investigators followed the drawing and pried open the old double doors, they found the hallway still intact, dim, dusty, and lined with broken lockers. The walls were stained with water damage and mold, but at the end of the corridor, just like the drawing, was a door. It had a rusted handle and a school-issued lock, one that hadn't been touched in years. Inside, they found a room filled with discarded furniture, broken desks, and old yearbooks stacked in piles. A collapsed ceiling panel hung low, and debris was scattered across the floor. At first, it seemed like another dead end. But when a detective moved an old metal filing cabinet, something unexpected was revealed: a narrow utility closet, completely hidden behind it. Inside, the air was colder, stale. The light from a flashlight bounced off the concrete walls, revealing a set of shelves, some wires, and a strange wooden crate tucked in the corner. But what made their hearts race wasn't the room itself. It was what they found inside the crate. A single white sneaker, child-sized, with faded blue stripes. It matched the shoes Jamie had been wearing when he left home. News of the discovery spread quickly, and speculation ran wild. Was the room used to keep Jamie hidden? Was it a place someone took him to before sealing the area off? And if so, how did no one hear or see anything? Was it possible Jamie had been right there in the school the entire time, just a few walls away from classrooms filled with teachers and kids? As authorities pieced together timelines, something else began to emerge: reports of strange behavior and unusual noises from students in the early 80s. One former teacher, Mrs. Chandler, who taught art at the time, remembered a boy complaining about hearing whispers in the basement storage room. Another recalled seeing the janitor near the sealed wing days after the fire, long after he was supposedly reassigned. Then there were the journals. In the weeks following the locker discovery, an anonymous tip led investigators to a box of old notebooks stored in the school's archives. Among them was a weathered journal with the initial CW on the inside cover. The entries were cryptic, filled with notes about the school, mentions of the boy, and strange references to keeping the promise. Most of the writing didn't make sense. But one entry stood out, written shakily and in pencil. He wouldn't stop asking questions. I had to make him understand. The place below is quiet. No one goes there. That line haunted investigators. What was the place below? Was it the hidden closet? Or was there something deeper in the school, something no one had found yet? The school was closed down temporarily for further investigation. And the Collins family, once again, was caught in the spiral of unanswered questions. The past was wide open now, and whatever secrets Pine Hill Middle School had buried were beginning to rise to the surface. But there was still no sign of Jamie. No remains. No voice. No answer to the question that still hung in the air like fog. Where did he go? And who else knew? After the discovery of the sneaker and the strange journal entry, the town of Pine Hill changed. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was fear. A quiet kind of fear that made people close their blinds a little earlier at night and keep their kids close when walking past the school. The sense that something dark had been lying just beneath their feet all along was too much for some to accept. Still, investigators kept working. The school building became a crime scene, with officers coming in and out daily. Reporters hovered outside the caution tape, whispering theories. People wanted answers, but none were coming. Just more layers of mystery. Emily stayed in town longer than she'd planned. She couldn't leave, not now. Not when pieces of her brother's life were finally resurfacing. She spent her days revisiting places she hadn't seen in years. The park near their old house, the gas station Jamie used to buy gum from, even the corner where they used to wait for the school bus. But it was the school that drew her in every time. She kept going back, staring at the old bricks, the faded school sign, the boarded-up West Wing. She needed to understand. Somewhere deep inside, she still hoped Jamie was alive. Maybe hurt, maybe taken, but alive. The police began interviewing former students from 1981, hoping someone might have noticed something, even if they didn't realize it at the time. One name that stood out was Melissa Kane, now in her late 40s. She had been in Jamie's class, a quiet girl with a sharp memory. When officers showed up at her small home a few towns away, she was reluctant at first. But something about the case stirred something in her, maybe guilt, or maybe fear that she'd waited too long. She remembered Jamie. He was always asking about the school, she told them. He said there were tunnels, that he'd heard someone talking under the floors during lunch. Melissa said she hadn't believed him. Kids made things up all the time. But one memory had stuck with her. A few days before Jamie vanished, she'd stayed after school for extra help with math. While walking past the stairwell near the West Wing, she'd heard a sound, metal scraping against metal, and then a whisper. She didn't know what it said. She assumed it was just the janitor, or maybe one of the teachers locking up. But something about it had made her walk faster, heart racing. There was more. A year after Jamie disappeared, Melissa said she saw something written on the inside of her locker door. It hadn't been there before. It said, "Don't go below." I was wrong. She reported it to a teacher, who told her it was probably just a prank. The locker was repainted, and the message disappeared. But the words stuck with her. Investigators grew more convinced that the school held deeper secrets than anyone had guessed. They began searching for architectural blueprints, trying to map out every basement room, crawl space, and maintenance tunnel. At first, they found standard designs. Nothing unusual. But then an old maintenance worker, now retired, came forward with a rolled-up copy of the school's original plans from the 1960s. And there, faint but clear, was a second level beneath the West Wing. A sub-basement. No stairs shown, no access points listed. Just a series of lines that looked like corridors, and a small room at the center, marked only as Storage B. When they brought in ground-penetrating radar, it confirmed the existence of hollow spaces beneath the sealed wing. But there was no visible way in. No trapdoor, no elevator, no stairs. Just concrete walls and silence. Whatever was down there hadn't been touched in decades. Meanwhile, Emily was growing restless. She started talking to people herself. Old friends of Jamie's, former teachers, anyone who had been around in 1981. One conversation in particular haunted her. It was with Mr. Keller, who had been the music teacher back then. Now in his 70s and living in a nursing home, he barely remembered names. But when she mentioned Jamie, something lit up in his eyes. He asked too many questions, Mr. Keller said quietly. They didn't like that. When Emily asked who they were, he shook his head. The ones who meet after dark. Below. That place was never meant for children. Emily didn't know what to make of it. Was he just confused? Rambling in old age? Or was there something to it? Around this time, a second journal turned up, this one found in a box of personal effects donated to a thrift shop in town. The journal belonged to a student named Aaron Dent, who had been a year ahead of Jamie. Aaron had passed away in a car accident in the late 90s, but his belongings had been stored by relatives and eventually donated. The journal, written in shaky teenage handwriting, described a secret club that some kids at the school believed in. They called it the Ones Below. According to the entries, kids would dare each other to go to the West Wing after dark, trying to talk to them. Most of it read like creepy schoolyard legends, talk of ghosts, hidden doors, and strange sounds. But one entry dated just 2 days before Jamie's disappearance said something chilling. Jamie says he found the door. Says he heard someone calling him from the old storage room. He says he's going back tomorrow. I told him not to. He just smiled and said, "They know I'm coming." As more pieces came together, the idea that Jamie had stumbled into something bigger than a simple disappearance began to take hold. But no one could agree on what that something was. Was it a crime? An accident? Or something more unexplainable? And then came the security footage. As part of the school renovations in 2003, a team had been tasked with digitizing old VHS tapes from the school's archives. Most were uneventful pep rallies, choir concerts, science fairs. But one tape, marked simply November 1981, surveillance, showed something strange. The angle was from a hallway camera near the West Wing, the footage grainy and black and white. At exactly 3:42 p.m. on the day Jamie went missing, the camera caught a brief movement. Jamie walking alone down the corridor, wearing his denim jacket, turning the corner toward the sealed section. And then, nothing. The next 10 seconds of tape were scrambled, full of static. When the footage resumed, Jamie was gone. The hallway was empty. The glitch was never explained. Some said it was a magnet issue or old tape degradation. Others believed someone had deliberately erased that part. Either way, it raised more questions. How had he gotten into that part of the building? Who was he meeting? And why had no one seen him leave? Rumors swirled again, some saying Jamie had uncovered something the school wanted buried. Others suggested he had found a passage to something ancient, something tied to the land the school was built on. One theory even brought up the idea of a hidden society, an underground group using the school as a front. Wild, unbelievable stuff. But in the absence of answers, people clung to whatever they could. And then, for the first time in over 20 years, Jamie's voice was heard again. A tape recorder, discovered in a locked storage box during a final sweep of the sub-basement archives, was turned over to police. When played, the static-filled tape revealed a child's voice, weak, scared, and barely audible. "I don't know where I am. The lights went out. I hear them moving. I think they're coming back. If someone finds this, please tell my mom I didn't mean to go." The recording cut off with a loud click. No one knew when it had been recorded or how it ended up in that box. But it was Jamie. Emily knew it. His voice. His words. Proof that, at some point, he had been alive after he vanished. But it left more questions than it answered. Was he left down there? Trapped? Taken? Or worse, had someone been down there with him? And as investigators returned to the West Wing with new permits and deeper digging equipment, one thing became terrifyingly clear. They hadn't found the bottom yet. The day they brought in the drilling team was the first time in years that the town felt truly awake again. It wasn't excitement. No one would call it that. But a kind of restless anticipation, like everyone was holding their breath at once. Police had sealed off the entire west wing of Pine Hill Middle School, now worn and cracking, the bricks almost seeming to sag under the weight of the years and secrets buried within. The drilling began early in the morning, loud, shaking the ground. It didn't take long for word to spread that something had been found, beneath the foundation, far lower than any plans had ever indicated. A narrow shaft, hidden under 2 layers of concrete and rebar. Not large, just wide enough for a person to pass through. Emily stood just outside the barrier tape, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her heart thudded painfully with each clang of the drill. She didn't know what she wanted more, to find her brother or to never know what happened. Either way, the truth felt close. Almost too close. Something about the place made her skin crawl. The air was thick. The silence between the sounds rang louder than the drilling itself. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel empty, it felt full of something watching. The shaft was dark and cold. Investigators lowered a camera first. The footage came back grainy, almost unreadable, but one thing was clear, there was a space down there. A real room. With walls. With corners. And what looked like shelves? Boxes? No one could say for sure. What stood out most, though, was something strange on the floor. Symbols, maybe. Shapes made in dust. Nothing official, but not random either. The kind of thing someone left behind with purpose. Once the opening was deemed safe, a small team of 2 officers and 1 forensic investigator went down. The drop wasn't far, less than 15 feet, but the air changed as soon as they passed through. It was colder, damp, with a smell that had no name. The flashlight beams danced along the walls, revealing what the camera couldn't. A small concrete room, maybe 10 by 10 feet, filled with old crates, broken furniture, and scattered school supplies. But it wasn't the objects that sent a chill up their spines. It was what was written on the wall. 4 words. Etched, not painted. I was here, Jamie. The letters were uneven, scratched into the concrete with something sharp. It was real, physical, and it made everything too real. He had been there. Somehow, Jamie Collins had made it to that room, and then vanished. The search intensified. Cadaver dogs were brought in. More ground was scanned. And then came another find, smaller, more personal. A spiral notebook, the cover faded and curled, buried under debris in one corner. Inside, pages filled with Jamie's unmistakable handwriting. Most were illegible from moisture and age, but a few lines were still clear enough to read. One page, near the back, said, "They said I could leave if I listened. But the voices don't stop. I think they're lying." That line echoed through the entire investigation. No one could explain it. What voices? Who were they? A person? A group? Something else? Then, for the first time, they noticed something even stranger. Some of the drawings in the notebook matched the ones from Jamie's old classwork. But one stood out. It was a sketch of a circle filled with markings, and in the center, a stick figure, small and alone. Around the edge, tiny eyes, over a dozen, drawn again and again. Staring in. Watching. Emily held the notebook like it was a piece of Jamie himself. The weight of it almost unbearable. She stayed silent during the press conference that followed, choosing instead to spend more time with detectives and investigators, pushing them to keep looking, to keep digging. Something in her refused to believe this was all there was. And then came the story no one wanted to believe. A former substitute teacher reached out to police after seeing the news coverage. Her name was Lydia Granger. She had only worked at the school for 6 months in 1980, but she remembered something strange, an after-hours meeting she wasn't supposed to attend. She had stayed late one evening to prepare lesson materials, and when she left her classroom, she heard voices coming from the West Wing, despite it being off-limits. She walked quietly toward the sound and saw 4 adults in the hallway. 2 teachers, the principal, and the janitor, Wilkins. They were speaking softly, but she caught a phrase that made her pause. "We've agreed. No more children. This ends with him." She was fired 2 weeks later, without warning or reason. Her account was vague. No solid proof. But it opened the floodgates for more strange details. Files that had been lost, security reports that had been filed and then deleted, even student complaints that were never followed up on. The deeper they went, the more it looked like people had been hiding something for years. Not just one person. Multiple. And whatever it was, it started long before Jamie disappeared. Even the town's history came under scrutiny. Pine Hill was built on land that had once belonged to a now-defunct religious group, the Aurelian Society, active in the late 1800s. They believed in listening to voices from the earth and had been rumored to conduct rituals underground, beneath their churches and caverns, sometimes even digging their own hidden sanctuaries. Nothing had ever been proven, and the group dissolved before the turn of the century. But maps showed that one of their buildings had stood not far from where the school was later built. More people came forward. More fragments of a puzzle too large to see clearly. A janitor in the 1990s who quit after hearing footsteps in the West Wing long after school had closed. A group of seniors in 1984 who claimed they had snuck into the West Wing on a dare and saw a boy standing silently in the shadows who didn't speak when they called out to him. When they turned away, he was gone. They'd laughed it off as nerves at the time, but now they weren't so sure. The deeper the town looked, the more blurred the line between truth and legend became. But one thing remained constant. Jamie Collins had found something, or someone, and now, more than 2 decades later, it was beginning to surface. In a final push, the school board authorized the full excavation of the sub-basement. Walls were taken down. Flooring was removed. What they found next turned everything inside out. Another tunnel. Older. Brick-lined. No one had a record of it. It curved downward, far below the school's foundation. And this time, there were stairs. Stone, uneven, damp with condensation. They didn't match any known architecture from the school or from modern construction at all. It looked ancient, abandoned, but not untouched. Investigators hesitated to go further until proper support could be installed. But Emily, she didn't wait. Late one night, unable to sleep, she returned to the site. She knew the layout by heart now. She slipped past the gate, through the broken wall, into the tunnel. She carried Jamie's notebook with her like a guide. Every step echoed. The deeper she went, the colder it got. The silence pressed in, heavy and unnatural. It didn't feel like being alone. It felt like being watched. The stairs seemed endless, winding. She counted over 50 before the space opened into another chamber. A circular room. The walls were stone, and the ceiling stretched higher than she expected. There were markings everywhere, carvings in the stone, symbols matching Jamie's drawings. And at the far end, something she wasn't prepared for. Another door. Heavy, wooden, bound with iron straps. There was no handle, no knob, but something was written above it in the same uneven hand she'd seen before. I stayed. Will you? Her breath caught. She stepped closer. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Because what lies beyond that door is the final piece of the mystery. But opening it may change everything. Emily stood frozen in front of the door, her fingers grazing the cold iron bands that ran across its surface. The message above it, I stayed. Will you? Rang louder in her head than her own heartbeat. She could still hear the faint echoes of her steps from the tunnel behind her, but in front of her, there was only silence. Not just quiet. Silence, so deep it felt unnatural, like even the air was holding its breath. Her flashlight flickered once, and she smacked it lightly. It came back, casting a weak beam across the uneven floor. The symbols etched into the stone seemed to shimmer slightly, not with light, but with some unseen depth. As she stepped forward again, she caught a sudden, low sound, not mechanical, not animal. It was humming, a soft, slow vibration, like a tune with no melody. It stopped as quickly as it started, and the silence rushed back in. She reached for the door again, but this time, something changed. A low click sounded beneath her feet. The stone floor shifted slightly, and a panel near the far wall cracked open just an inch. She turned quickly, flashlight pointed, and stared. Slowly, she approached the newly opened gap. Inside was a narrow compartment carved into the wall, and within it, a small wooden box, no larger than a shoebox, covered in a thick layer of dust. She hesitated, then lifted it out. It was heavier than she expected. Inside were several objects, an old Polaroid photo, a child's toy car, and a folded envelope. She unfolded the photo first. It was Jamie, standing in front of the school, smiling. But beside him, someone else, a girl Emily didn't recognize. She flipped the photo over. On the back, written in small, hurried handwriting, "We weren't supposed to find it." Her fingers trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, yellowed with age. The letter read, "If you're reading this, it means you've come too far. The people here made a mistake. It was never meant to be found. But we heard it. We followed the voices. And now we can't leave. Please don't open the door." There was no signature, no date. Emily's breath caught in her throat. A part of her wanted to run back the way she came, scream for help, get out before something truly irreversible happened. But another part, the part that had carried her this far, refused to turn back. Not without Jamie. Not without knowing. She tucked the letter back into the box and placed it in her backpack, then turned again to face the heavy door. As her hand brushed the wood, another sound echoed through the chamber. A voice, whispered, close, and unmistakably young. "Emily." She spun around, the flashlight beam shaking wildly. No one. Nothing. "Emily, don't." It came again, softer. Not from the door. From behind her. From the tunnel. Her body froze. She called out, voice barely above a whisper. "Jamie." No answer. Suddenly, footsteps. Not hers. Faint, rapid, coming from the stairs. Emily backed into the wall, flashlight pointed at the entrance. And then a figure appeared, covered in dust, face pale, eyes wide. It was Detective Rayner. "Emily, what the hell are you doing down here?" She could barely speak. "I had to see. I had to find him." Rayner stepped closer, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. You shouldn't be down here. This isn't safe. The floor's unstable. And this door, this place, none of it's in the original records. We're way off the grid now. Emily nodded, trying to pull herself together. There's something behind this door. I know it. Rayner hesitated. We're not opening it tonight. Not until the team's ready. We didn't even know this level existed until yesterday. But, no, he said firmly. You found a clue. You did good. Now come on. We need to get out of here. She reluctantly followed him back toward the tunnel. But just before they reached the stairs, she looked over her shoulder one last time. The door remained closed. But the symbols on the walls, they seemed brighter, as if they were glowing faintly in the darkness. Back on the surface, the team regrouped. The discovery of the box, the letter, and the deeper tunnel were shared with state investigators. A new task force was formed, and within 48 hours, a full team was sent to Pine Hill. Structural engineers, historians, forensic analysts. The school became a federal site overnight. But Emily couldn't rest. The photo haunted her. Who was the girl with Jamie? Why had no one mentioned her before? She went through Jamie's yearbooks, class rosters, even old newspaper clippings. Eventually, she found a name. Isabel Mendez. Transferred mid-year, early 1981. No photos after spring. No record of where she moved. Her parents had been seasonal workers, barely documented in town records. Emily tracked down one of Jamie's old classmates, a woman named Bree, now living in Chicago. I remember Isabel, Bree said. Quiet. Smart. She and Jamie were inseparable for a while. Then one day, she just stopped coming to school. No one asked questions? Back then? No. It was just like she vanished. Emily's stomach twisted. Two kids, gone within months of each other. Both connected to the same part of the school. The same voices. The same tunnel. The next day, investigators brought down more equipment, thermal scanners, air quality monitors, drones. But one by one, the drones lost connection past the heavy door. The chamber interfered with signals. Something about the stone. Or maybe something else. That night, Emily returned again, this time with Rayner's reluctant approval, as long as she didn't enter any sealed rooms. She brought the photo with her, stared at it as she sat in the lower chamber. Then she noticed something she'd missed before. In the background, far behind Jamie and Isabel, there was a faint shadow. A figure, blurred and distant. Watching, she scanned the wall again. And then, for the first time, she realized something terrifying. The symbols, they weren't just decorations. They were names. Not in English. Not in any language she recognized. But each symbol was slightly different, arranged in a pattern that now seemed eerily familiar. She counted them. 22. Jamie had been missing for 22 years. One symbol for each year. She looked to the door again. And for a moment, just one fleeting second, she thought she saw it move. A tremble. A sigh. Like whatever was behind it had felt her realization and was responding. And then came a final twist she never expected. The photo. She'd taken a picture of it with her phone earlier, and now, comparing the screen to the original, her blood went cold. The shadow behind Jamie and Isabel? It wasn't there in the phone photo, only on the original. And when she looked closer, she realized the figure wasn't watching. It was reaching, hand outstretched, toward Jamie, toward Isabel, or maybe toward whoever looked at the photo. The investigators upstairs said they needed more time, more clearance. They wanted to wait before opening the door. But Emily wasn't sure there was time. Because something was waking up. Emily didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photograph, Jamie, Isabel, and that dark figure reaching in the background. She tried telling herself it was just a trick of the light, an old image deteriorating with time. But something deeper told her that wasn't the case. The difference between the physical photo and the digital one couldn't be explained away so easily. There was something strange happening, something that no camera or investigator could capture. The following morning, she returned to the site earlier than the others. The federal team wasn't due back for another hour, and Rayner had gone to meet with state officials to review the growing list of unexplained findings. Emily stood at the tunnel entrance alone, heart racing. The weight of Jamie's notebook was firm against her back, and she held the photo in her hand, folded in half. The air was cooler than usual, and the wind sounded different. Less like rustling leaves, more like whispering voices just out of reach. She passed through the barriers and down the steps again. This time, her flashlight didn't flicker. It held steady, as if something knew she needed light now more than ever. When she reached the chamber, she paused and stared at the door. There were fresh marks on the floor. Small, almost invisible, like footprints. Not boot prints from investigators, bare feet. Children's feet. A chill rippled down her spine. She moved slowly, deliberately. The door hadn't changed. It remained closed. Silent. Heavy. But the symbols on the walls glowed faintly in the dim light, as if alive. She pulled Jamie's notebook from her bag and began flipping through it. The last few pages were different. They weren't just scribbles anymore. They looked like messages. In Jamie's shaky handwriting, a sentence appeared over and over. She followed me here. Who was she? Suddenly, the humming returned. That low, quiet tone that made her teeth ache and her bones feel hollow. The door let out a soft creak, just the faintest sound of which stretching. Emily's breath caught. It hadn't opened, but it was no longer still. Then, without touching it, the door slowly began to part. Dust poured from the seam as the old iron bands groaned and shifted. Emily stepped back, heart pounding. Light didn't flood the space behind the door. There was only darkness. A heavy, unmoving black, like fog with weight. She held up her flashlight, but the beam only penetrated a few feet before being swallowed whole. And then came the whisper. Emily. This time it wasn't behind her. It came from inside the room. She stepped forward. Jamie. No answer. Just a low, dragging sound, like someone walking barefoot across stone. She crossed the threshold slowly, 1 foot in, then another. The temperature dropped sharply. Her breath came out in small clouds. The room inside was larger than expected, much larger than what could possibly exist beneath the school. The walls were smooth stone, lined with more of the same symbols. In the center, a circle had been carved into the floor, and at the edge of the circle, curled against the wall, was a figure. She moved closer. Jamie. He didn't move. Her voice cracked. Jamie, is that you? He stirred. Slowly, painfully, the boy raised his head. His face was thin, pale, but unmistakable. It was Jamie, but older. Not the 9-year-old from the photos. More like a teenager, maybe 17 or 18. As if time had passed, differently here. He looked up at her, eyes wide and tired. You shouldn't be here. Tears filled her eyes. You've been missing for 22 years. How are you alive? I'm not sure, he whispered. Time is wrong here. It doesn't move the same way. Emily reached out to him, but he flinched. We can go. We can get you help. Everything's going to be okay. He shook his head slowly. It won't let me go. She frowned. What won't? Before he could answer, the room shifted. A low rumble vibrated through the floor. The symbols on the walls began to pulse, as if reacting to their presence. Jamie's voice grew thin with fear. It's waking up again. I didn't mean to wake it. I just followed the voices. Me and Isabel. We thought it was just a game. Emily gripped his shoulder. Where's Isabel? He looked down at the circle. She's still here. Emily's eyes followed his gaze, and for the first time, she noticed the shadow within the carved circle. Not just a stain, not just a shape. It was her, curled like Jamie had been, unmoving, a figure etched into the stone itself. Her body had become part of the room. She made a choice, Jamie said. She listened. She let it in. The humming returned, louder, vibrating through Emily's skull. A presence began to fill the room. Something old. Watching. Not a creature. Not a ghost. Something beyond either. It didn't move, but it was there. In the walls. In the stone. In the voices. Jamie clutched Emily's hand suddenly. If one of us leaves, the other has to stay. That's the rule. That's how it keeps balance. It told us that. Emily shook her head. No, that's not real. We'll find a way. You're coming with me. But the ground trembled again, harder this time. The door behind them began to close, the darkness folding in around the room. Jamie stood, his body weak but determined. You found me. That was your part. Now I can leave. But you. She pulled him forward, ignoring his words, guiding him back toward the door. The darkness fought them. Each step grew harder, like wading through thick air. She could hear the voice now, not Jamie's, something ancient and female. "Stay," it whispered. "You belong." "No," Emily said through gritted teeth. "Not today." They crossed the threshold together, and for a split second, everything snapped. A flash of cold, a pressure in her head, and then silence. They stumbled into the outer chamber. The light from her flashlight suddenly returned to full strength. The symbols on the walls dimmed, and the door behind them slowly swung shut. Jamie collapsed to the ground, coughing, eyes wide with disorientation. Emily cradled him, her heart pounding. "You made it," she whispered. "You're really here." He looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "I didn't think I'd ever leave." Moments later, the investigation team arrived, rushing down the stairs with equipment and stretchers. Rainer froze when he saw Jamie. His mouth fell open, speechless. They carried Jamie out slowly. Emily followed behind, her limbs trembling, her mind spinning. The town exploded with the news. Jamie Collins had been found, alive, after 22 years. And somehow, he hadn't aged normally. Doctors were baffled. Nothing made sense. But that night, when Emily returned home, something felt wrong. Her apartment was dark. Still, she moved slowly through the rooms, switching on lights. But in the corner of her bedroom, something caught her eye. The photo. It sat on her desk. And now, there were 3 figures. Jamie, Isabel, and a third shadow. Tall, unclear, standing behind Emily. Reaching. Her heart skipped. She turned, but nothing was there. The whisper came softly, almost loving. "You opened the door." Then silence. Emily didn't sleep the next night either. Even with Jamie safe and doctors monitoring him around the clock, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed her back. The photo on her desk haunted her. The shadow, the third figure, hadn't been there before. And though she tried to convince herself it was a smudge or some trick of the light, she knew better. She'd seen too much, felt too much. Whatever had been in that underground chamber wasn't bound by stone or distance. It had reached into her life, and it had left something behind. In the days that followed, Jamie stayed under medical care. Doctors ran every test imaginable, but none of the results made sense. His physical body was that of a 17-year-old, despite being missing for 22 years. His blood work, muscle structure, and cognitive function all pointed to someone who had aged differently. Not in years, but in presence. He remembered the school. He remembered Isabel. And he remembered the voices. But everything else, all the years in between, were a blur. Like living in a dream with no days or nights. Investigators sealed off the tunnel indefinitely. Officials debated what to tell the public. Some believed there had been a hidden chamber built long ago, never documented. Others believed it was a psychological reaction, mass hysteria, or trauma manifesting in strange ways. But the people who had seen the chamber, the symbols, the sealed door, they knew. They didn't talk about it openly, but in hushed tones and quiet meetings, they admitted there were things that science couldn't fully explain. Rainer, for one, believed Emily. He had seen enough. He'd stood in the room, seen the pulsing walls, heard the low, droning hum. He didn't need any more proof. What happened beneath Pine Hill Elementary would stay with him for the rest of his life. Emily spent more time with Jamie. Slowly, he began to adjust. His body grew stronger. He started eating full meals, walking with support, and asking questions. His voice was quieter now, like someone who lived too long in silence. He often asked about Isabel, where she was, what had happened to her. Emily didn't know how to answer. She didn't have the heart to tell him that Isabel had never made it out, that she had been absorbed into whatever presence lived behind that door. One afternoon, as they sat together in the hospital garden, Jamie spoke softly. She heard the voice first. It told her things, promises, about people she'd lost. She wanted to believe it. Emily nodded. "You tried to stop her?" "I did," he said, "but I didn't try hard enough. I followed her instead." Emily reached for his hand. "You were kids. You couldn't have known. She gave herself to it," he whispered. "So I wouldn't have to." Tears welled in his eyes, and Emily squeezed his hand tighter. She didn't need to speak. The silence between them said more than words could. Back at her apartment, she kept the photo locked in a drawer. She tried throwing it away once, but the next morning it was back on her desk. Clean, undamaged, staring up at her like it had never moved. Eventually, she stopped trying to get rid of it. Instead, she turned it face down, shoved it deep into a box, and told herself it was over. That part of the story was done. And for a while, it was. Weeks passed. Jamie recovered further. The school remained closed, with talks of tearing it down entirely. People started moving on. Local news stopped reporting on the mystery, focusing instead on budget cuts and upcoming elections. The buzz faded, as it always does. But those who had been close to the case, Emily, Rayner, a few members of the investigation team, they never really moved on. They just learned to carry it. One evening, Emily sat down and began writing everything. The whole story. From Jamie's disappearance in 1981 to the day they found him alive in that sealed chamber. She wrote about Isabel, about the photo, about the door. She didn't know if she'd ever share it. Maybe it was just for her, to put it down, to make it real. But in writing it, she began to feel lighter. Like some of the weight she'd been carrying was finally shifting. She reflected on what the story had meant. It wasn't just about a boy who vanished. It was about how people forget, how places change, how the past doesn't always stay buried. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes, when you dig deep enough, it reaches out to you. Emily visited Jamie less frequently as he began transitioning back into the world. Social workers and therapists helped him navigate things, learning modern technology, understanding how much had changed. He wasn't the same kid who'd gone missing, but he was still Jamie, and he was still here. That mattered most. Months later, Emily received a letter in the mail. No return address, no name, just a small envelope with thick paper inside. The note read, "You didn't stay, but you were supposed to. The balance isn't fixed." She froze. The handwriting was the same as the note found in the box behind the wall. The same rushed, narrow script. Attached to the letter was a single photo. Black and white. Old. It showed Pine Hill Elementary. But different, worn down, overgrown, empty. Standing at the edge of the frame were two children, a boy and a girl. And beside them, a tall, shadowed figure, its face obscured. In the background, the school door was open. Emily stared at the photo for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. Instead, she picked up the phone and called Rayner. "I think it's starting again," she said. He sighed on the other end. "You want to meet?" She looked at the photo again and nodded. "Yeah, let's meet." And that's where Emily left the story for now. The school was torn down later that year. The land was sold to developers, and the underground chambers were sealed with concrete. But even then, there were reports. Strange sounds at night. People seeing shapes in the woods behind where the school used to be. Some stories don't end with clean resolutions. Some mysteries don't get solved. But Emily had found something in that darkness, something more powerful than fear. She found truth. And she found Jamie. And though she never opened the photo box again, she kept it. Just in case. Because in places like Pine Hill, where time can bend and shadows stretch farther than they should, it's not always about what you find. It's about what finds you.